They tried to fool him with lies worth millions. But I, a simple waitress, told the millionaire the truth. The room fell silent. Nobody expected a woman like me to see through their scheme. Maybe you're serving tables for people who don't appreciate it, or cleaning up after everyone else has left. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I promise, today's story will touch your heart. My name is Sarah, and for 32 years, I've carried trays through the elegant dining rooms of Manhattan's finest restaurants. My hands smell permanently of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. My feet ache from standing on marble floors that cost more than my yearly rent. But today, I want to tell you about the moment when everything changed. When this invisible woman became the most important person in a room full of millionaires. It started like any other Tuesday morning in September. The alarm buzzed at 4:30, cutting through the darkness of my small apartment in Queens. I could hear Mrs. Rodriguez next door already shuffling around, preparing for her early shift at the hospital. The walls here are thin, so thin you can hear everyone's dreams and nightmares bleeding through. I pulled myself from the narrow bed, my joints protesting like they always do. 63 years old, and my body keeps a ledger of every double shift, every heavy tray, every humiliation swallowed with a smile. The subway ride into the city takes 45 minutes when the trains cooperate. I pressed my face against the window, watching Queens fade into the tunnel's darkness, then emerge into the concrete canyon of Manhattan. Around me, other service workers dozed against the vibrating metal walls. We're the invisible army that makes this city run. We clean your offices, serve your meals, watch your children. But do you see us? Really see us? Le Bernardin was already buzzing when I arrived. The kitchen staff moved like dancers in their choreographed chaos. Steam rose from industrial ovens while prep cooks diced vegetables with mechanical precision. I tied my apron tight around my waist, checking my reflection in the stainless steel surface of a refrigerator. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, sensible shoes that had walked thousands of miles across restaurant floors, and tired eyes that had seen too much but never lost their kindness. My section included Table 12, the prime corner booth with a view of Central Park, reserved for VIPs and high rollers. Today's reservation was for Marcus Whitfield, a real estate mogul whose net worth hovered around $200 million. His investment portfolio included everything from Manhattan penthouses to cryptocurrency ventures that made headlines in the financial papers. I'd served him before. He was the type who snapped his fingers for service and never remembered my name, despite my serving him lunch every Tuesday for the past 6 months. The morning passed in its usual rhythm. Coffee refills for the power breakfast crowd, delicate explanations of the chef's special to ladies who lunched, patient smiles for customers who treated me like part of the furniture. My lower back throbbed, reminding me of the herniated disc that flared up when it rained. The doctor said I needed surgery, but who has time for surgery when you've got rent to pay and a grandson in college, depending on your help with his tuition? Around noon, Marcus Whitfield arrived with his usual entourage. 3 men in identical navy suits, their faces sharp with ambition, and their watches worth more than I made in a year. But today, there were 2 additional guests. They introduced themselves as international investors interested in Whitfield's latest venture, a luxury resort development in Dubai worth $200 million in initial capital investment. I approached their table with my practiced smile, notepad ready. "Good afternoon, Mr. Whitfield. Your usual?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Whatever. Just bring drinks for everyone. Make it quick." The 2 new men ordered in accents I couldn't quite place. Middle Eastern, perhaps, but something felt off about the way they pronounced certain words. I've heard many accents working in Manhattan restaurants. This city is a symphony of languages and cultures, and after 3 decades of serving, you develop an ear for authenticity. As I served their drinks, I caught fragments of their conversation. They were discussing investment strategies, portfolio diversification, and profit margins that made my head spin. But then I heard something that made me freeze. One of the investors mentioned a document they needed Whitfield to sign. He pulled out a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be official contracts written in both English and Arabic script. My heart skipped. You see, what these wealthy men didn't know about their invisible waitress is that I speak Arabic fluently. My late husband, Ahmed, was from Lebanon. We spent 15 beautiful years together before cancer took him. He taught me his language, his culture, his love for poetry and music. When he died, I kept practicing Arabic by volunteering at the mosque in Astoria, helping elderly immigrants navigate government paperwork and medical appointments. The document the investor handed to Whitfield was supposedly from a Dubai construction company, but as I refilled their water glasses, I glanced at the Arabic text. My blood ran cold. The letterhead claimed to be from Sharika Albina Al-Fakhir, the luxury construction company. But the Arabic was completely wrong. It was gibberish, like someone had run English text through a translation program without understanding the grammar or context. I returned to the kitchen, my mind racing. These men were trying to defraud Marcus Whitfield of $200 million with fake documents. As much as I disliked his arrogance, I couldn't stand by and watch anyone be robbed, even someone who treated me like I was invisible. But who would believe me? I was just the waitress, a 63-year-old immigrant woman whose opinion had never mattered to people like Marcus Whitfield. If I spoke up, I might be dismissed, fired, or worse. Yet my conscience burned. Ahmed used to say, "Sarah Habibti, when you see injustice and say nothing, you become part of the injustice." The afternoon stretched on. I watched the table, noting how the investors spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing around to make sure no one was listening. They ordered expensive wine, a $200 bottle of Bordeaux that they sipped while discussing profit projections and return on investment. Whitfield seemed impressed by their projected dividends, nodding as they painted pictures of luxury resorts and wealthy tourists flocking to spend their euros and dollars in Dubai's booming real estate market. By 3 o'clock, they were ready to close the deal. The investors had spread several documents across the table, each supposedly official, each bearing Arabic seals and signatures that would convince anyone who couldn't read the language. Whitfield reached for his Mont Blanc pen, worth more than my monthly salary, preparing to sign away millions to these criminals. I couldn't wait any longer. My hands trembling, I approached the table with a fresh pot of coffee. As I poured, I leaned close to Whitfield's ear and whispered in perfect Arabic, "Hatha Muziaf. This is fake." The reaction was immediate. Whitfield's hand froze above the contract. The two investors looked up sharply, their faces suddenly pale. The entire dynamic of the table shifted in an instant. "What did you just say?" Whitfield asked, his voice cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise. I took a deep breath. 32 years of swallowing humiliation, of being talked over and looked through, led to this moment. I said, "This is fake, sir. These documents, they're not real." The lead investor laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. Are you going to let your waitress disrupt a multi-million-dollar deal?" But Whitfield held up his hand. For the first time in 6 months of serving him, he looked directly at me. Really looked. "You speak Arabic?" "Yes, sir. My late husband was Lebanese. I read Arabic fluently." I pointed to the letterhead. "This document claims to be from a construction company in Dubai, but the Arabic is completely wrong. It's not even proper grammar. It's like someone used Google Translate and hoped no one would notice." The color drained from the investors' faces. One of them started gathering the papers hastily. "This is offensive. We don't need to listen to accusations from restaurant staff." But Whitfield wasn't listening to them anymore. He was studying my face with intensity. "Show me," he said quietly. With shaking hands, I pointed to specific lines in the Arabic text. "This word here means water buffalo, not construction. And this phrase translates to my grandmother's kitchen, not luxury development. Someone copied random Arabic words and hoped they looked official. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the soft jazz music playing through the restaurant's sound system, the distant clatter of dishes being washed, the muted conversations from other tables. But at table 12, nobody breathed. Whitfield stood slowly, his face hardening as the reality sank in. "I think we're done here." The fake investors scrambled to pack their materials, but Whitfield's security team was already moving. Within minutes, the police arrived. As it turned out, these men were part of an international fraud ring that had targeted wealthy Americans with fake Middle Eastern business opportunities. The FBI had been tracking them for months. Later, after the chaos settled and the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, Whitfield approached me at the server station. I was rolling silverware, my hands moving automatically through the familiar task while my mind still reeled from what had happened. "Sarah," he said, and I nearly dropped the fork I was polishing. He knew my name. "I owe you an enormous debt of gratitude." I looked up at him. This man who had treated me like furniture for months, now standing before me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Respect. "Anyone would have done the same thing," I said softly. He shook his head. "No. Most people would have minded their own business. You saved me from losing everything." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I realize I've been less than gracious to you. That changes now. But the story doesn't end there with a neat bow and happy music, because in this world, doing the right thing doesn't always lead to immediate rewards." The next morning, I arrived at work to find my manager, Gerald, waiting for me with a stern expression. "Sarah, we need to talk." My heart sank. Gerald was a thin, nervous man who worried more about celebrity gossip in the kitchen than actual management. He led me to his closet-sized office behind the wine storage. "Corporate heard about yesterday's incident," he began, avoiding my eyes. "They're concerned about staff interfering with customer business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I prevented a crime, Gerald. Those men were criminals." "That may be true, but you embarrassed important clients." "The restaurant has a reputation to maintain." He handed me an envelope. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but we're going to have to let you go." The envelope contained 2 weeks' severance pay and a generic termination letter. 32 years of loyal service reduced to corporate speak about restructuring and new directions. I cleaned out my locker in silence, packing my spare apron, my pepper spray, and a photo of Ahmed I kept tucked behind the schedule board. Walking out of Le Bernardin for the last time felt like leaving a part of my soul behind. Not because I loved the work. My feet hurt constantly, my back ached, and most customers treated me like I was invisible. But it was my identity. I was Sarah the waitress. Without that apron, who was I? The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of unemployment applications and mounting bills. My savings, never substantial to begin with, dwindled quickly. The rent on my Queens apartment seemed enormous without a steady paycheck. I started selling some of Ahmed's things, his watch, his coin collection, books in Arabic that I couldn't bear to read anymore. Each sale felt like losing him all over again. My daughter Lisa called from Seattle, her voice tight with worry. "Mom, come stay with us. You don't have to go through this alone." But I wasn't ready to give up on New York, on my independence, on the life Ahmed and I had built here together. "I'll be fine, Habibti," I told her, using Ahmed's pet name. "Just need a little time to figure things out." The job market for 63-year-old waitresses isn't exactly booming. Restaurants want young faces, quick feet, and employees who won't complain about wage theft or workplace harassment. I applied everywhere. Diners in Queens, coffee shops in Brooklyn, even fast food chains that made my back hurt just thinking about them. Most applications disappeared into the digital void. The few interviews I got ended with polite rejections and advice to consider other career paths. One afternoon, as I sat in a Starbucks nursing a single coffee I'd been sipping for 2 hours to avoid going home to my empty apartment, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mrs. Hassan?" The voice was familiar but out of context. "This is Sarah." "This is Marcus Whitfield. I've been looking for you." My heart stopped. Had he tracked me down to blame me for causing trouble? To sue me somehow? Rich people had lawyers for everything. "Mr. Whitfield, if this is about, I want to offer you a job." The words didn't compute. "Excuse me? Can we meet? I have a proposition for you." We met at a small cafe in Midtown, neutral territory away from the world of white tablecloths and crystal glasses, where our paths had crossed before. Whitfield looked different outside his usual environment, less intimidating, more human. He was drinking black coffee from a paper cup like a regular person. "First, I want to apologize," he said without preamble. "The way I treated you was inexcusable. You worked hard, you were professional, and I barely acknowledged your existence. That's on me." I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Second, I want you to know that I went to Le Bernardin the day after you were fired. I demanded they rehire you immediately. When they refused, I pulled my business permanently. I also convinced 12 other regular customers to do the same." He smiled grimly. "Gerald was fired yesterday. New management is reviewing all their personnel policies." A wave of satisfaction washed over me, followed quickly by guilt for feeling good about someone else's misfortune. "But that's not why I called," Whitfield continued. "I'm opening a new restaurant, nothing fancy, more of a neighborhood place in Queens near where you live. Honest food, honest prices, honest treatment of staff. I need someone to run it, someone with experience, integrity, and the kind of wisdom that can't be taught in business school." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a job offer that made my eyes water. Manager salary, health insurance, profit sharing, and a clause guaranteeing respectful treatment of all employees. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because you saw the truth when everyone else was blinded by money. Because you spoke up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Because in all my years of making deals and accumulating wealth, I've never met anyone with your kind of character." The restaurant opened 3 months later in Astoria, just 15 minutes from my apartment. We called it Habibti's Kitchen. Ahmed would have loved that. The menu featured Mediterranean classics alongside American comfort food, prepared by a diverse kitchen staff that reflected the neighborhood we served. My first day as manager, I stood behind the host station wearing a professional blazer instead of an apron, watching families enjoying dinner, listening to multiple languages blending into the comfortable hum of community. A young server named Maria approached nervously. This was her first restaurant job. "Mrs. Sarah, table 6 is complaining about their wait time. They're being really rude. I don't know what to do." I smiled and straightened my blazer. "Let me handle this." The couple at table 6 were the type I knew well. Dressed expensively, voices loud with entitlement, treating the staff like servants. The man was snapping his fingers at Maria, demanding immediate attention. I approached with calm confidence. "Good evening. I'm Sarah, the manager. I understand you have concerns about your service?" The woman looked me up and down dismissively. "Finally, someone in charge. This little girl doesn't know what she's doing. We've been waiting forever for our appetizers." I checked my watch. They'd been seated 12 minutes ago. "I apologize for any confusion. Your appetizers are being prepared fresh and should be out momentarily. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to treat our staff with respect. Maria is an excellent server, and we don't tolerate rude behavior toward our team." The man spluttered. "We're paying customers. We'll act however we want." "Actually," I said evenly, "respect is a requirement for dining here. If you're unable to meet that standard, I'll be happy to have your check prepared so you can find a restaurant that better suits your preferences." They stared at me in shock. They were used to intimidating young servers, not facing a manager who valued her staff over difficult customers. After a moment of tense silence, their attitudes adjusted immediately. For the first time in my life, I had the power to protect other service workers from the humiliation I'd endured for decades. Every shift brought opportunities to stand up for dignity, to insist on basic respect, to show young servers that their worth wasn't determined by how much abuse they could silently absorb. Marcus became a regular customer, stopping by every Tuesday to sit at the same corner table. But now our relationship was different. He asked about my family, remembered details about my life, and always thanked me by name when he left. Sometimes he brought business associates, and I noticed how he introduced me, not as the manager, but as Sarah, who saved my company and taught me what integrity looks like. One evening, as I was closing up, Marcus lingered after the last customer had left. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" I looked up from the register. "Of course." That day at Le Bernardin, when you could have stayed quiet but chose to speak up, what made you do it? I thought about Ahmed, about the values he'd taught me, about all the years I'd watched from the sidelines while powerful people made decisions that affected everyone around them. My husband used to say that silence in the face of injustice makes you part of the injustice. I couldn't live with myself if I'd let those men steal from you, even if you'd never treated me with kindness. He nodded slowly. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." He was. He would have been proud to see this place, to see working people treated with dignity. I gestured around the restaurant with its warm lighting and family photos on the walls. "This isn't just a job for me, Mr. Whitfield. It's proof that invisible people aren't really invisible. We just need someone willing to see us." The months passed, and Habibti's kitchen became a pillar of the neighborhood. We employed 12 people full-time with living wages and health benefits. Local families celebrated birthdays and anniversaries in our dining room. Elderly customers from the nearby mosque became regulars, sharing stories in Arabic that reminded me of Ahmed. One year after opening, we were featured in a neighborhood newspaper. The article talked about our commitment to worker dignity and community service. But what moved me most was a quote from Maria, the nervous young server who had become our head waitress. "Mrs. Sarah taught me that serving people is honorable work, but you never have to sacrifice your dignity for anyone's comfort. She shows us every day that respect goes both ways." Standing in my restaurant office reading those words, I felt Ahmed's presence so strongly I could almost smell his cologne. This woman who had carried trays for 32 years, who had been ignored and dismissed and eventually fired for doing the right thing, had built something meaningful. Not just a business, but a place where working people could maintain their pride while serving others. The story could end there, with justice served and dignity restored. But life isn't a neat fairy tale, and the most important part happened on a quiet Thursday evening 6 months ago. A young woman came in alone, clearly distressed, wearing a server's uniform from another restaurant. She ordered just coffee and sat in the corner booth, crying quietly. I recognized the signs: the exhaustion, the humiliation, the feeling that the world only sees you as help, never as human. I brought her coffee and sat down across from her. "Rough day?" She looked up with eyes full of tears. "I got fired today. Some customer complained that I was inappropriate because I wouldn't let him touch me. Management believed him over me." My heart broke for her. How many young women face this choice, endure harassment, or lose their jobs? "What's your name, honey?" "Carmen." "I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't afford my rent, and who's going to hire me without a reference?" I thought about my own journey, about the moment Marcus Whitfield saw past my uniform to my character, about the chance I'd been given to prove my worth. "Carmen, how would you feel about working here? We're looking for experienced servers." Her eyes widened. "But you don't know me. You don't know if I'm any good." "I know you stood up for yourself when it mattered. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The rest we can teach." Carmen has been with us for 6 months now. She's studying business management at the community college, and we're helping with her tuition. She wants to open her own restaurant someday, one that treats workers with dignity. The cycle continues. One invisible woman helping another find her voice, her value, her place in a world that often forgets we exist. But Carmen's story taught me something else about the ripple effects of standing up for what's right. 3 weeks after she started working with us, she came to me with tears in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Mrs. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The restaurant that fired me, they just got shut down by the health department. Turns out they were covering up all kinds of violations: spoiled food, unsanitary conditions, wage theft. The owner was arrested yesterday." I set down the inventory clipboard I'd been holding. "How did the authorities find out?" Other workers started coming forward. When word got out that I'd found a job at a place that actually protects its employees, people began calling me. They wanted to know if it was really possible to work somewhere safe, somewhere that wouldn't punish you for speaking up. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. 6 people called the health department with complaints. 6 people who had been too scared to say anything before. That's when I understood the true power of what had happened that day at Le Bernardin. It wasn't just about saving Marcus Whitfield's money or even about my own redemption. It was about breaking a cycle of silence that kept working people trapped in situations where their dignity was negotiable. Word spread through the immigrant community in Astoria. Women who had been enduring harassment, workers who had witnessed safety violations, servers who had been cheated out of tips. They all began to understand that their voices mattered. Habibti's Kitchen became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol that standing up for yourself was possible, even if you were just the help. The local mosque started hosting monthly meetings for service workers, and I was asked to speak at the first gathering, standing before 50 women, housekeepers, nannies, restaurant workers, hospital cleaners. I saw my own story reflected in their tired faces. "Sisters," I said in Arabic, then repeated in English, "you are not invisible. Your dignity is not for sale. And when you witness injustice, your silence makes you part of it." An elderly woman in the front row raised her hand. "But what if we lose our jobs? What if they call immigration? What if our families suffer?" I nodded, understanding the weight of her fears. I can't promise there won't be consequences. When I spoke up, I was fired. I lost my income, my health insurance, everything I thought I needed to survive. But you know what I learned? Surviving with your dignity intact is better than thriving while your soul dies a little every day. After the meeting, women approached me one by one, sharing their stories. A housekeeper who had been cleaning the same Manhattan penthouse for 10 years had never been given a raise, despite the family's obvious wealth. A nanny whose employer regularly screamed at her in front of the children she cared for. A hospital cleaner who had been exposed to dangerous chemicals without proper protective equipment. Each story reminded me of my own years of swallowing mistreatment, of accepting less than I deserved because I believed that was just how the world worked for people like me. But it doesn't have to be that way. We started a support network. When someone faced workplace abuse, they weren't alone anymore. We helped each other find new jobs, provided references, shared information about employers who treated workers fairly. Most importantly, we reminded each other that our worth wasn't determined by how much suffering we could endure in silence. Marcus noticed the change in our community engagement. One Tuesday evening, as he finished his usual dinner, he asked about the meetings at the mosque. "You're organizing workers," he observed, not disapprovingly, but with curiosity. "I'm reminding them that they have rights," I corrected, "and dignity, things that shouldn't need to be fought for but often are." He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, before I met you, I never really thought about the people who cleaned my offices or served my food. They were just there. Background noise in my important life. And now? Now I wonder how many Sarah Hassans I walked past without seeing, how many times someone's integrity or intelligence or wisdom was right in front of me, but I was too arrogant to notice." He paused, stirring his coffee. "I've started paying better attention to the security guard who works nights in my building. His name is David, by the way, and he's putting his daughter through nursing school. To the cleaning crew that comes to my office, Maria Elena, the supervisor, speaks 4 languages and helps other immigrants navigate the school system for their kids. What changed your mind? You did. When you saved me from those criminals, you didn't just protect my money. You showed me that character doesn't correlate with bank account balances, that wisdom doesn't require a Harvard MBA, that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else ignores. This conversation led to something unexpected. Marcus offered to help fund a nonprofit organization focused on workplace dignity for service workers. He wouldn't be the face of it, that was my role, but he would provide the financial backing needed to expand our reach beyond just one Queens neighborhood. Workers' Dignity Network launched 6 months ago. We have partnerships with 3 local mosques, 2 churches, and a community center. We provide legal consultations for workers facing discrimination or wage theft. We offer English classes for immigrants who want to advocate for themselves more effectively. Most importantly, we teach people that their voices matter, that speaking up is not just their right, but their responsibility. The network has already helped expose unsafe working conditions at 2 restaurants, assisted 15 workers in recovering stolen wages, and provided job placement services for dozens of people who left abusive work situations. But our most significant victory happened just last month. A young man named Roberto came to one of our meetings. He worked at an upscale steakhouse in Manhattan, where the management regularly skimmed money from the servers' tips. The practice was systematic. They claimed it was for administrative costs, but it was outright theft. Roberto and his co-workers were too afraid to complain because most were undocumented immigrants who feared deportation. They steal 30% of everything we earn, Roberto told the group, his voice shaking with anger and fear. But what can we do? If we complain, they'll call ICE. I looked around the room at the faces of women and men who had heard similar stories too many times. What would happen if you all spoke up together? I asked. Not just the workers at your restaurant, but servers from other places who face the same theft? Over the next month, we organized quietly. Roberto connected us with workers from 6 different restaurants owned by the same management company. We documented the wage theft carefully, gathering pay stubs and testimonies. Most importantly, we coordinated with immigration lawyers who understood the protections available to workers reporting labor violations. When we finally went to the Department of Labor, we came with evidence from 47 workers across 6 restaurants. The investigation that followed revealed over $2 million in stolen wages over 5 years. The owners were prosecuted, the restaurants were fined, and every stolen dollar was returned to the workers with interest. But the victory went beyond just money recovered. Roberto stood up in court and testified, his voice clear and strong as he described the systematic abuse. The judge commended his courage and noted that without workers willing to speak truth to power, these crimes would continue unchecked. After the hearing, Roberto hugged me with tears in his eyes. "Mrs. Sarah, you taught me that my silence was their weapon. When I found my voice, I found my power." That's when I knew that my moment of whispering, "This is fake," to Marcus Whitfield had grown into something bigger than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about one waitress saving one millionaire from fraud. It was about breaking cycles of silence and fear that keep working people trapped in exploitation. The ripple effects continue spreading. Last week, I received a call from a woman in Philadelphia who had heard about our work through social media. She's starting a similar network in her city. A month ago, a professor from Columbia University asked me to speak to her sociology class about workplace dignity and immigrant rights. They've invited me back next semester to teach a workshop on community organizing. Most surprisingly, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wants to tell the story of Workers' Dignity Network. She says our approach, combining practical support with community empowerment, represents a new model for labor organizing in immigrant communities. "Your story shows something important," she told me during our first interview. That real change doesn't just come from legislation or policies handed down from above. It comes from people at the bottom finding their voices and refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. But perhaps the moment that meant the most to me happened 3 weeks ago. I was working late at the restaurant, reviewing payroll to make sure everyone's wages were correct, something I check personally every week because I remember what it feels like to be cheated. My granddaughter Layla called from college. "Grandma, my sociology professor shared an article about you in class today, about the Workers' Dignity Network and how you're changing things for immigrant women." I nearly dropped the phone. "An article about me?" "Yeah, in some academic journal. She said you're an example of grassroots leadership emerging from marginalized communities." I was so proud, I started crying right there in class. Layla paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "Grandma, you know what this means to me? My whole life I watched you work so hard, watched people treat you like you didn't matter, watched you come home exhausted from jobs where nobody respected you. I used to think that's just how the world works for people like us. And now? Now I see that you were never powerless. You were just waiting for the right moment to show everyone what you're made of. You've inspired me to change my major, actually. I want to study immigration law. I want to help other families like ours fight for their dignity." After we hung up, I sat alone in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the chairs stacked on tables and the gentle hum of the refrigerators. I thought about the long journey from that moment at Le Bernardin, a frightened waitress whispering about fake documents, to this moment where my story was inspiring a new generation of advocates. Ahmed always believed that every person has a purpose, even if they don't discover it until late in life. "Ya Habibti," he used to say, "sometimes God plants seeds in the hardest ground because that's where the strongest trees grow." I was 63 when I found my voice, 64 when I became a restaurant manager, 65 when I started organizing workers. There's no expiration date on courage, no age limit on standing up for what's right. Some of the most powerful voices in our Workers' Dignity Network belong to women in their 70s and 80s who have decades of wisdom about surviving in this world. Mrs. Fatima, who cleans offices in downtown Manhattan, is 72 years old. She's been organizing her co-workers for 6 months now, teaching them to demand proper safety equipment and fair wages. "I spent 50 years being quiet," she told me last month. "I have possibly 10 good years left. I'm not wasting them in silence." These stories multiply every day. A housekeeper who negotiated her first raise in 15 years. A restaurant worker who reported sexual harassment and kept her job because we provided legal support. A group of hotel cleaners who successfully unionized after attending our workshops on workers' rights. But the transformation isn't just about external victories, it's about inner change. The moment when someone who has been invisible their whole life suddenly sees their own worth reflected in their actions. That's what happened to me, and it's what I see happening to others every week. Yesterday, a young woman named Aisha attended her first Workers' Dignity Network meeting. She works as a home health aide for an elderly man whose family treats her terribly. They pay her below minimum wage, expect her to work unpaid overtime, and speak to her like she's a servant rather than a skilled healthcare provider. She sat quietly through most of the meeting, but at the end, she raised her hand tentatively. "I have a question," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you find the courage to speak up when you're scared?" I looked at her, seeing my own younger self in her hesitation, her fear, her doubt about whether her voice mattered. "You start with the truth," I told her, "not the truth about what might happen to you. That's just fear talking. The truth about what's right and what's wrong, the truth about your own worth. When you know those things deeply, courage follows." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I've been working for this family for 2 years. They've never once said thank you. They leave messes for me to clean that have nothing to do with caring for their father. Last week, they accused me of stealing jewelry that they later found in their laundry. I didn't say anything because I need the money." "And how did that silence feel?" I asked gently. like dying a little every day. Then you already know what you need to do. This morning, Aisha called me. She had gone to work and calmly informed the family that she would be working only her contracted hours going forward, that she expected professional treatment, and that any accusations without evidence would result in her immediate resignation. The family was shocked by her sudden assertiveness, but they agreed to her terms because they knew she was an excellent caregiver. "Mrs. Sarah," she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. I was terrified the whole time I was talking. But afterwards, I felt like I could breathe again, like I remembered who I am underneath all the fear. That's the moment of transformation I witness over and over. It's not about becoming fearless. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite the fear. It's about remembering that your dignity isn't something someone else can give you or take away. It's yours, inherently, just by virtue of being human. The Workers' Dignity Network now serves over 300 people across Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. We've expanded to offer financial literacy classes, helping workers understand their rights around taxes, benefits, and wage calculations. We provide childcare during our meetings so parents can attend. We've partnered with local colleges to offer scholarship opportunities for the children of service workers. But our core mission remains the same: helping invisible workers find their voices and use them to demand the dignity they deserve. Marcus continues to be one of our most steadfast supporters, though he insists on staying in the background. "This is your movement," he reminds me. "People need to see that change comes from within communities, not from wealthy benefactors swooping in to save the day." He's right, of course. The most powerful moments in our work happen when workers themselves become organizers, when someone who was once afraid to speak up becomes the person teaching others to find their voice. Maria, the server who was so nervous her first day at Habibti's kitchen, now runs orientation sessions for new members of the Workers' Dignity Network. Carmen, the young woman who was fired for refusing harassment, has been accepted to law school with our help and plans to specialize in employment law. Roberto, who exposed the tip theft at his restaurant, is now working with us full-time as a community organizer. The chain of empowerment grows stronger with each person who decides that their voice matters. Today, as I lock up Habibti's kitchen and head home to my quiet apartment, I think about the journey from that moment when I whispered, "This is fake," to a millionaire I barely knew. The courage to speak truth to power changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone whose life I now touch, through this restaurant and through the Workers' Dignity Network. I think about you listening to this story. Maybe you're working a job where you're not valued. Maybe you're serving people who don't see you as fully human. Maybe you're staying quiet about injustices you witness because you're afraid of the consequences. Maybe you've convinced yourself that your voice doesn't matter, that you're just one person against systems too powerful to challenge. Here's what I learned. Your voice matters. Your integrity has value. The people who dismiss you as just a waitress or just a cleaner or just whatever job you do, they're wrong. There is no such thing as just when it comes to honest work and decent character. The Arabic phrase Ahmed taught me was, "Kul insan lahu karama." Every person has dignity. That dignity doesn't come from your bank account or your stock portfolio or your real estate investments. It comes from how you treat others and how you stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Marcus Whitfield learned that lesson the hard way. His millions couldn't save him from fraud, but a 63-year-old waitress who spoke the truth could. Money is powerful, but character is stronger. Your story doesn't have to wait for the perfect moment or the ideal circumstances. It doesn't have to begin with dramatic confrontations or life-changing encounters with millionaires. It can start with something as simple as refusing to accept disrespect from a customer, or supporting a coworker who's being mistreated, or asking for the wages you're legally owed. Every act of courage, no matter how small it seems, creates ripples that extend beyond what you can see. When you stand up for yourself, you give permission to others to do the same. When you refuse to participate in systems of exploitation through your silence, you weaken those systems. When you speak truth, even when your voice shakes, you contribute to a chorus of voices that becomes impossible to ignore. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you saw something wrong but stayed quiet because you thought your voice didn't matter? Have you ever served people who treated you like you were invisible? Have you ever convinced yourself that injustice was just how things are instead of something you could challenge? Tell me your story in the comments below. Share your moment of finding your voice, or maybe you're still looking for it. Either way, you're not alone. There are networks of support available. People who understand what it means to be invisible in a world that only seems to value wealth and power. And if this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps this message reach other people who need to hear that their voice, their dignity, their truth matters just as much as anyone else's. You can find more stories like this in our special podcast. Just click the link on the left. Remember, you have the power to change your story and to help others change theirs. The world needs your voice, your perspective, your courage. Don't let fear convince you to remain silent when you could speak up and make a difference. Thank you for listening to my journey from invisible waitress to restaurant manager to advocate for working people everywhere. Thank you for seeing me, for hearing me, for understanding that every person in this world has a story worth telling and a voice worth hearing. The next chapter of my story is still being written, and yours is too. Make it count. I'll see you in the next story, and remember, your voice has power. Use it.